afternoon, everybody. I would like to welcome you all to the regularly scheduled meeting of the Parks and Recreation Commission for Wednesday, January 25th, 2023. So before we do the roll call, two things for those in the room and who might be listening. Bear with us. We have a new audio-visual system with very fancy screens in front of us, so there may be a few teething pains as we figure out how this all works. And please bear with me if I look at you like this. I forgot my glasses. With that, may I have the roll call, please?
Chair McGill.
Here.
Vice Chair Feck.
Here.
Commissioner Aldana.
Present.
Commissioner Chang. Commissioner Clark. Commissioner Lesnar-Buxton. Commissioner Anand-Laberge.
Okay, thank you very much. And before we move on to changes to the agenda, I would like to introduce our new commission member, Jeff Chang, sitting to my left. He's just started his 4-year term today. And with that, I'll just turn it over to say, first of all, to say welcome to the commission. We look forward to working with you. And if you'd like to introduce yourself.
Sure. Hello, I'm Jeffrey Chang. I moved to Santa Barbara about a year ago. I like parks, I like recreation, and I'm really excited to contribute. Thank you for having me.
Thank you very much. We look forward to it. And it'll be our first meeting without Bibi in 29 years, so that'll be something. Do we have any changes to the agenda?
No, we do not.
Okay, great, thanks. Any written public comment other than what we received on agenda items? I didn't see any.
No.
Okay, great, thank you. That brings us to public comment. Any member of the public may address the commission for up to 2 minutes on any subject within the jurisdiction of the commission that is not scheduled for a public discussion before the commission. So those of you with a slip on the tree, that'll be when we get to the agenda item. The total amount of time for public comment will be 15 minutes. I only have the one speaker slip. Do we have anybody online?
For those who wish to speak during public comment, please use the raise your hand functionality in the Zoom control panel. When I call on you, please unmute yourself and then speak for a maximum of 2 minutes. For those who wish to speak on an agenda item later in the meeting, please raise your hand when the item is under discussion. No hands raised.
Okay, great, thanks so much. All right, that brings us to the commissioner assignment reports. I won't do the electronic queuing for this. I'll just go down like the line like I normally would. I will start with Commissioner Anand-Laberge, please.
The Arts and Crafts Commission did not meet because it was during that really bad week in January where all the rain was coming, so their meeting got canceled.
Yeah, smart move. Vice Chair Feck.
The Creeks Commission was also canceled, and they'll resume in February.
Okay, thanks. They were watching the creeks. Commissioner Aldana.
No, a slow month for me due to the weather.
Commissioner Clark.
Good evening. I attended the Integrated Pest Management Committee meeting. I'll let Kathy report on that. I did want to say that one of the IPM members suggested looking into the use of nematodes as opposed to abamectin, not as a sole way to avoid the use of the abamectin, but as a supplement to it. And I think it was a good suggestion. And I think, going back to looking at those alternative integrated pest management strategies is always going to be good for our department.
Yeah.
I also attended the STAC meeting, and we'll talk about all those trees that we visited later in the agenda.
Okay. Commissioner Chang, you're off this month. And then finally, I was also at the IPM meeting, which Commissioner Clark reported on, probably notably the golf course discussion of nematodes. Also talked about removing an oak that's growing in not a very fortuitous spot on an oak at the Mission Historic area. And as I always do in these meetings, I learned a lot about gophers. And we had a Park Foundation meeting last week where we reviewed financials and also had a discussion really around policies with respect to the umbrella groups that we support. And then over lunch this today, we had a meeting of the De La Guerra Plaza Advisory Committee Arts and Culture Subcommittee, I think that's what it's called. And that group is moving very efficiently and effectively, and we were actually reviewing really the whole request for qualification and proposal process and documentation over lunch today. And that takes me out. And next on the agenda is the summary of council actions. What did I skip? I did. God, I skipped a bunch of things. I know, I have an excuse. Okay, so then the commission and staff communications, do we have anything?
No, Chair McGill, and we don't have any ceremonial items either for this month.
Okay, great, thank you. And then consent items. What was that? Okay, now we're at summary of council actions. Okay. And we just had the one. Does anybody have any questions or comments on that? Director, any?
Oh, I did.
Nope.
I was just wondering, I've kind of lost track of where we're at with the Sustainable Trails project, and I was wondering what that will look like this year.
Chair McGill, Commissioner Clark, could you repeat that?
Oh, I was just looking at the summary of council actions. I've lost track of what we're doing with the Sustainable Trails project, and I just was wondering what this year will look like.
Sure. Thank you very much. So this is actually for Parma Park, and the funding comes from the Parma Park Trust. We received an annual disbursement from the trust for the maintenance of the park. Because we're on the cusp of implementing the first phase, implementation construction of the plan, they approved moving those funds directly to support that project. The project has been on hold, was on hold due to COVID, also staffing shortages, but now that we have Monique O'Connor on as our new open space associate planner, she is the project manager, and the project is currently actually out to bid. It will be phased in 3 phases, so this would fund, we're focusing on the first phase. For those of you that are familiar with Parma Park, it's essentially the area that's adjacent to El Cielito and off the Stanwood entrance. We will bring a presentation to the commission at a future date, since it's been a while, I think, since the commission heard about this project, and we're now finally moving forward, A, and B, it is a project that's entirely funded by the Parma Park Trust, so it's being funded at no cost to the city.
Great, thank you, great. Okay, anything else? You're going to have to uncover that to push the button to talk, you know.
Oh, gosh, I'm sorry. I just can't focus with like a bright screen in my face. I feel like I'm in a movie. Okay.
We'll get used to it, yeah. Okay, that brings us to the minutes. Recommendation that the commission waive the reading and approve the minutes of the regular meeting of December 14th. Do I have,
I'll second. I'll second.
did we have a motion?
Oh, I thought you made a motion. I'll make a motion that we waive the reading of the regular scheduled meeting on December 14th, 2022.
I'll second that.
Okay, great, thank you. Discussion, all in favor?
Aye.
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 Opposed? Abstention?
I abstain.
Okay, great. And then that takes us to our trees. Mr. Slack, welcome.
Good afternoon, Chair McGill and Commissioners. The First Street Tree Advisory Committee recommendation for review is the request to remove 4 trees. These are all trees within the public right-of-way. There are 2 jacarandas and 2 coast live oaks. The applicant for this project is actually the Public Works Department. So they're going to be putting new sidewalk in along the street. The 4 trees that are there happen to fall directly within where the new sidewalk will be. So kind of unfortunate where they placed them, but at the time, I think it made good practical sense. So the new sidewalk will come through. There will be a new parkway. It's like a new 4-foot parkway and I think a 6-foot sidewalk there. And We identified 6 new planting locations, and so the project will be planting 6 new street trees, new designated street trees. So again, the applicants are requesting the removal of the 4 trees. The committee reviewed the application. We looked at the trees on site. It was group consensus pretty quickly that it was a reasonable and practical development of property. Huge improvement for this block. There are no consistent sidewalks from Chapala to De La Vina, so this will be a big improvement for pedestrians. And after review, the committee made a recommendation to approve the project as proposed.
Okay, thank you very much. Does anybody have any questions for Mr. Slack?
Yes, I have one.
So if you, yeah, thank you.
Okay, gotta get used to
Okay. Commissioner Aldana.
it. Yes, where the 2 jacarandas are, isn't that going to be a parkway?
Chair McGill and Commissioner Aldana, there will be parkway there, but the trees are still within the footprint of the sidewalk. So it was impossible to retain them.
And how wide is the parkway?
I think it was 4 feet. So I think when we look at the practicality of parkway, that, you know, I think everybody on the commission is pretty comfortable with the size of the jacaranda, the mature size. So even if you could keep it, it would be right next to the sidewalk and lead to pretty significant sidewalk damage over time.
So how close to the curb is the new trees going to be?
It'll be centered, but we'll also be using root barrier.
Okay, it seemed to me that it would fit right in the parkway. That's it for me.
Director Zachary, you're hovering over the button.
Chair McGill, Commissioner Aldana, if you go to page 7 of the first attachment, it shows essentially where I believe the sidewalk will be placed on West Padre, and actually both on West Padre, even though the street address is 2033 Chapala. And it shows where the existing trees are and why they're in conflict of the new sidewalk. And you can see, there's no dimension that I can read.
Can you put it on the
but
screen?
that shows that there is a parkway for the trees to be planted.
Okay.
But yeah, I mean, basically, the trees are right on the sidewalk. Yeah.
Okay, so
Does anybody have any additional questions? Okay, I do not have any oh, all right. Commissioner Hernando-Laberge.
Thank you. Just a quick
does look
question
better.
with regards to tree number 2, which does kind of look like it's in the middle of where the parkway would be, or maybe I'm not looking at that right, and that's the sidewalk.
It's the Coast Live Oak.
Tree number 2.
Chair
that-
McGill and Commissioner Hernando-Laberge, I performed a site visit with Public Works. We looked at everything, including all options for tree retention, because that is our primary goal. And in no situation did it make practical sense to retain the trees in the long term. Again, I think even if you can envision trying to accommodate the trees in the short term, you're going to set themselves up for lots of root pruning, lots of sidewalk destruction, rather than taking a fresh start, putting root barrier in and placing the trees in places where they can be successful in the long term.
Yep. Unfortunate, but, yeah.
one more question.
Okay.
So it kind of goes without saying that the hedge where the oak trees are, and that'll be removed also?
Chair McGill and Commissioner Aldana, yeah, essentially everything within that sort of imagined parkway is all going to have to be removed, including within the footprint of the sidewalk. So a couple of the properties do have to kind of forfeit quite a bit of vegetation in those areas. It is within public right-of-way, though, so.
Okay, thank you. I do not have any speaker slips for this. Do we have anybody online wishing to speak on this topic?
Anyone who would like to speak on this item, please raise your hand in the Zoom control panel. No hands are raised.
Okay. With that, I would open it up for discussion or a motion as appropriate.
I'll move to follow the recommendation and approve the street removal request.
Okay, so that's a motion to approve the recommendation to remove the trees at 2033 Chapala Street. Do we have a second?
I'll second.
Okay, any further discussion? All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Okay, yes. Ms. Clark? Yes.
Do we need to include on our motion based on the,
Oh, it's street trees, so I don't think we do.
we don't have to?
Yeah.
Okay.
That's correct, isn't it? We don't need to do that for street trees. Okay. But thank you. All in favor? Aye. Opposed? Okay, so moved. All right, so that takes us to La Cadena.
Chair McGill and Commissioners, the next Street Tree Advisory Committee recommendation for review is a request to remove 2 weeping fig trees. These are also street trees located within the public right-of-way in front of the property at 26 La Cadena Street. The applicant listed multiple reasons on the application for removal, including debris, hardscape disruption, sewer lateral issues, and just concerns with the trees kind of blocking their view of the foothills. The committee reviewed the application, we reviewed the trees on site. There was consensus the trees were in pretty good shape. There was discussions about the hardscape. There was some visible hardscape repair that had occurred. It looked as though at the time of review, everything was still in compliance, despite the fact that there has been some repair currently on site. We did kind of talk about the general condition of the trees while we were there as well. I think it was both staff and the committee's decision that the trees could benefit from just some routine maintenance. So we agreed on site with the committee that in the event of a denial, we would at least schedule the trees to be pruned as part of our service request program. There was quite a bit of discussion about the benefit of the existing trees in comparison to potentially doing like a proactive removal replacement, which is what the applicant was proposing, to take the trees out and replace them. And ultimately, after review, the committee determined the existing trees still provided pretty significant value to the property and the street, and recommended denial of the 2 weeping fig trees at 26 La Cadena Street.
Okay, thank you. Does anybody have any questions for Mr. Slack? Commissioner Chang?
Hardscape is and what the associated damage is.
Chair McGill and Commissioner Chang, great question. So when I say hardscape, it's kind of just a catch-all for sidewalk, curb and gutter, pretty much any of the impermeable infrastructure that we deal with in the public right-of-way that surrounds trees. So that can be like road, curb and gutter, and sidewalk, and it also is a driveway apron as well. So when we say hardscape disruption, typically it's sidewalk, but it could be, any of those or a combination of all of those things.
Commissioner Aldana, followed by Commissioner Clark.
Closer to the site, the driveway, don't you see a problem there that's going to happen sometime soon? Because the driveway and the sidewalk got repaired, but if the tree's still there, in due time, it's going to happen again. And the second question is, what's a designated street tree for that street?
Chair McGill and Commissioner Aldana, good question. I think the apron and a portion of that sidewalk was repaired. To try to forecast out if and when something happens, I think is pretty difficult. I think the trees are 30-something years old, talking to the neighbor across the street when I was out there initially looking at them. So they're quite old. Don't expect lots of additional growth, but to say that there's not a possibility of it happening in the future would probably be, inaccurate as well. The designated street tree is actually a trident maple, which is very rare and probably very difficult to find. So that's one of those situations, that we'll actually see later where it'll probably be time to take a look at the designation and make a modification to it to something that's available and a little bit more current.
Okay, thank you.
Commissioner Clark, your name came and went. Do you still have a question?
I wasn't aware that I had to like leave that on. I'm still learning the system. Leave this on the whole
Yeah,
time.
uncover it, maybe you could.
Because, in the past, when I raised my hand, I didn't leave it up the whole time. I was like, I just wanted to follow up on Commissioner Chang's question about the definition of hardscape. I'm thinking he might not be aware that the burden of repair of sidewalks, and a lot of hardscape falls on Public Works, not the private property owner whose house lies behind the sidewalk. I don't know if that's helpful.
So what would then happen is if there was a hardscape issue that was really raised here, is that would then go to Public Works to address hardscape concerns in the sidewalk. I do have one question. You talked about, well, the application, I should say, talks about having the sewer lateral line replaced already. Can you comment on potential future impacts on the sewer lateral line?
Chair McGill and Commissioners, historically, when sewer laterals are repaired, it really significantly reduces the probability of root infiltration. I'm not 100% sure the full extent of repairs that they made, but if it was a full repair from the house to the Y connection, the probability of root entry again is exponentially low. And then I think for Commissioner Chang's benefit, street trees and sewer lateral infrastructure problems are typically never valid rationale for removal, despite it certainly is a challenge as a homeowner, but all the way up into the courts with case law, the old sewer infrastructure like Orangeburg and Clay Tile, they at the time of installation just sat inside of one another, and there were all these gaps and seams, and the useful service life of these materials is much less than we've been able to rely on them. So it's generally acknowledged there's always a predisposed failure within the system to allow root entry. So the root's not causing the problem. Certainly makes it worse if it does find that failure within the sewer lateral, but does not cause the problem.
Okay, thanks. So if we do not have any further questions on this tree, we do have one speaker, so I will call for public comment. And it is Christian Watkins, and forgive this, but I'm not trying to hide. And I used to work the timer, but I don't anymore. And so you will have 2 minutes when Ms. Navarro sets the go button.
Sounds good. Okay. Yeah, my name is Christian Watkins. That's my wife, Cassandra. We live at 26 La Cadena. And in terms of just to address some of the points about the hardscape, the roots, there was repair to the hardscape as well on that first tree closest to the driveway. It's actually come up onto our property, and you can see where the roots have been, the sidewalk's been repaired and the roots have been cut in half. It does, speaking of the regular pruning, if the application was denied, we've been at the residence for over a year now, and the tree has overgrown to the point of being right chest height to me. I'm 6'2", and it was trimmed on accident by some gardeners who were doing some work over there. They trimmed the tree, so we haven't really seen regular pruning. So that would be great if regular pruning was done. It does drop a lot of debris on the property and does limit some visibility. And we would also be willing to replace the trees with either a new tree that meets the updated designation, or we could try to scour for the trident maples if need be. Yeah. I think that's all I
Okay.
have.
Okay, well, great. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Thank you.
All right, and do we have any public comment online?
No hands are raised.
Okay, great, thanks. With that, I'll turn it over for any discussion or a motion as appropriate. I'm looking at my screen.
I guess in terms of discussion, is it just among?
Yes, at this point. But yeah, the way the process works is that we have a period of questions, then it goes to public comment. We hear the public comment, and then we discuss amongst ourselves. If you have a specific question for somebody who's commented, that's also appropriate.
So I guess I'm curious, like, sorry. I guess I am curious. This might be outside the scope of what we do, and it seems like it doesn't meet the findings for tree removal, but, what is the remedy for a homeowner in this situation if they want to continue pursuing this outside of, you said that this is under the scope of Public Works. Like, do they have the ability to cut trees down as well, or like, what are their next steps?
Okay, well, I'll do a quick answer, and then I'll turn it over to Mr. Slack. There's a difference between street trees and setback trees, so these are
Okay.
actually city-owned trees. So there's certainly I'll let Mr. Slack speak to what is or isn't allowed in terms of maintenance of city trees by homeowners. Any denial can be appealed to city council within 10 days.
Right.
So if that's the actual language is right here.
Sure.
Okay. And I will turn it over to you to talk about maintenance of street trees in this instance, or any instance.
Chair McGill and Commissioner Chang. So the street trees do fall exclusively under Parks and Recreation Department purview. So Public Works does not have the ability to, say, make a decision to remove these trees. Hypothetically, let's say the sidewalk was really messed up really bad and it was reported and Public Works made a decision to fix the sidewalk. We work in conjunction with them to evaluate the root system of the tree, make decisions on whether root pruning can be employed or not in terms of a strategy for tree retention, and then they'll replace the sidewalk. And I believe, as Commissioner Clark mentioned, in almost all situations when a street tree does damage, like a sidewalk or hardscape, since city street trees are considered infrastructure, the city does facilitate those repairs. A different scenario would be is if a tree was in the front yard and there wasn't a street tree and the sidewalk was damaged, then that responsibility would fall on the property owner. In terms of maintenance, I'd say on average, we try to prune about every 5 to 7 years. And sort of to bridge that gap, if a homeowner really wanted to, you can get a permit from our office. The permit's no fee. However, the work is done at the property owner's expense if they so choose to do so. So some residents say want to elevate the maintenance of the tree, or maybe there's a fruiting issue with a palm tree where it's causing a little bit of hardship, but they're willing to kind of take that on and prune it a little bit more frequently than we're able to do. So that's another option in terms of maintenance. But we do have a responsibility to maintain all city street trees.
Got it. That's helpful. Thank you.
All right, any further discussion or motion? I'm in a kind of a place where, having looked at the trees, I mean, we see hardscape issues all the time and sewer lateral issues all the time, but they're city trees and they actually are quite healthy. And I think, my sense was that they performed a valuable service to the neighborhood. So I would struggle to support removal based on what I saw. So if there isn't any, okay, Commissioner Clark, you're getting it.
I was just going to say that, I agree with you. I feel for the homeowners because I have a very messy tree. I have a tree I've had to replace my sewer lateral. And then a neighbor behind my house 3 years ago planted a hedge that took away my mountain views in 3 rooms. And it's just a hedge. So I get it, but I do feel like the trees are public property. At this point, I'm hoping that we can look towards more pruning and maintenance and see if that can find a healthy balance for everybody.
Are we ready to make a motion? I'm sorry, we've. I'm sorry, no, I mean, that would be, if you have a follow-up question Mr. Slack's always available for questions. Yeah.
I will move to follow the recommendation and deny the street tree removal request.
And do we have a second?
I'll second.
Thank you. I was about to. Any further discussion? Commissioner Clark, was that the old one that I just forgot to get off? Okay. And, all right. With that, all in favor of the motion? Aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
I oppose.
Okay, thank you. So 5-1 denial, and you do have the right to appeal. You appeal to city council within 10 days, and I won't read all the numbers associated with it, but you do have the right of appeal. So, thank you. Okay, and we are now moving on to Seacliff? Yeah?
And Chair McGill and Commissioners, the next Street Tree Advisory Committee recommendation for review is the request to remove 6 lemon scented gum eucalyptus. These are located at the property at 3139 Seacliff. It's important to draw a distinction here. These are trees located within the setback of the property, not within the public right-of-way, so these are under private ownership. The applicant's requesting the removal of the 6 trees due to hopes of improving the property over time. The property was the site of an old nursery, and there were certain chemicals utilized over the years that made their way into the soil. And in order for the site to be developed, it requires pretty extensive soil remediation, requiring excavation down to a depth of 36 inches in certain areas. These trees lie directly within that contaminated area, and in order to move forward with the full soil remediation, the 6 identified lemon-scented gum trees need to be removed. The committee reviewed the application. We looked at the trees on site. They determined that the removals made practical sense. There was some concern with the committee members long-term about the development of the property and the fact that, you know, it's just as part of normal process, they would never really see the project again. The applicant didn't propose a specific number of replacement trees, even though they did express a receptiveness to planting new trees. And the committee felt really strongly about applying a condition to this approval to make sure that new trees will be part of whatever type of project is developed. I think the long-term hope is to subdivide this lot into 3 separate lots, so there will be 3 separate lots on this really large lot. And so after review, the committee made a recommendation to approve the removal on the condition that 6 24-inch box coast live oaks are planted, and made the determination that the commission can make the finding that a reasonable and practical development of property necessitates the trees removal.
Okay, thank you. Does anybody have any questions for Mr. Slack? I have a few, but any? Okay, I'll go. Do I have to put myself in queue? So I have 3 questions. The first was, I saw, and I couldn't remember when we had looked at this before, but I knew we had, and I saw on the map that it was in 2019. Do you remember what conditions we imposed on that approval? Because I know we did approve it, and I know it was basically the same reason.
Chair McGill and Commissioners, that's correct. It was reviewed in November of 2019. At the time, the applicant pursued the removal of 19 trees, all of which occurred within the public right-of-way. So the Braemar Road, which if you were out there quickly turns into what looks like a long gravel driveway, is technically a city street, and the right-of-way is actually quite wide. And then when you account for the setback, that's where these additional 6 trees kind of fell into the mix. So during the initial review in 2019, these 6 trees in the setback were left off of the application. We weren't privy to that. And so they've since come back requesting the removal of these 6 additional trees. At the time of the Commission's review, there were only 3 conditioned replacements. A lot of the rationale for that was a lot of the trees within the public right-of-way were very small and essentially like weedy trees that had kind of naturally germinated on their own. And in addition to that, if you remember from your site visit, there were a few really large trees that were pretty close to the road. Those occur outside of most of the soil remediation and were actually being kept as part of the project. So the larger trees close to the road are being retained, and a lot of the smaller stuff's going to be taken out just to kind of improve the overall project. So it was 19 trees were approved with only 3 conditioned replacements at that time.
Thanks. And I think the oaks that are right by the side of the road, right down from where the trees are that are being discussed right now, are they outside the remediation area? Is that why they're not being slated?
Chair
for
McGill
removal?
and Commissioners, that's correct, yeah.
Okay. And then are there other additional trees outside of our purview that are up for removal? And the reason I'm asking that question is just kind of get a sense of the replacement ratio.
Chair McGill and Commissioners, it's pretty safe to assume almost all of the trees on the lot will be removed, I think, due to one reason or another. A lot of it is driven by the soil remediation, but if they proceed with and are successful getting the lot subdivided and redeveloping it, it's safe to assume that
Just gonna be
almost all of the trees, at least, within the main portion of the parcel, will be removed.
There'll be houses, yeah. Yeah. Okay, does anybody else have any questions? Commissioner Aldana. Actually, this is a lot easier. Oh, no, that was the last one. Maybe it's not so much easier.
Well, I do have a quick one. How deep are they going to dig as far as removal? of
Chair
the
Chair
soil?
McGill and Commissioner Aldana, in the supplemental materials with the application was a map. That map had different levels of depth. The deepest that they're going within the footprint of these trees is 36 inches, so they're going down a pretty considerable depth. It varies throughout the project, but within the footprint of the trees, I think it was 24 to 36 inches.
Thank you.
Okay, if there are no additional questions, we don't have any speaker slips. Do we have anybody online for public comment?
Chair McGill, I know we have one person on the board here to answer any questions. If anybody have questions from the applicant, it's Mr. Stephen Peterson from Flowers and Associates. Does anybody have any questions for him?
If
Or
we-
he would like to speak now. Hold on a second.
Okay, so you will have 2 minutes as soon as the timer goes off.
Go ahead, Mr. Peterson.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair and Commissioners. I'm Stephen Peterson with Flowers and Associates. I didn't mean to say that I had to speak. I just wanted to let you know that I'm here. I'm representing the applicants, the Stewart Trust, and if you have any further questions, don't hesitate to ask. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I don't, yeah. And so with that, I will open it up for discussion and/or motion as see fit. Commissioner Clark.
I'm prepared to make a motion.
Okay,
I'll make a motion that we agree with the Street Tree Advisory Committee recommendation to approve the removals of the, trying to find the trees at 3139 Seacliff as proposed, and be replaced with one minimum 24-inch box oak per
I
removal.
think it's 3. I think, are you moving 3? 1 or 3?
One per removal.
And we need a finding on this one, since these are setbacks.
Well, I think that's, well,
Is that
that I
correct?
don't know about. I would say it's a,
And Chair McGill and Commissioners, to clarify, these trees are within the setback. I was just talking about the last review, almost all of the trees were within the right-of-way. So we should identify a finding. I'm happy to repeat the committee's recommendation if you would like.
oh, did the committee make what finding did they find? Because I think it's, well, it's a couple of things. It's reasonable development of property, safety of persons and property with the pesticides. So can we have 2 findings?
Yeah, reasonable and practical development.
Yeah, and safety of person or persons, because there are chemicals in there that need to be removed.
Would you second that modification?
I will second.
Okay. Any discussion? Well, actually, I only need to look at this. Okay, with that, all in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay. And that takes us to Mohawk Road.
And Chair McGill and Commissioners, the next Street Tree Advisory Committee recommendation is the request to remove a Norfolk Island pine located within the front setback of the property at 229 Mohawk Road. The applicants requesting removal of the tree due to just a general decline in health. We actually did see this project a while back. There was a small pepper tree also within the front setback. The commission approved the removal of that tree on the condition that a new tree be planted. That was shown on their on their landscape plan. At that time, they desired to retain the tree, and I think after thinking about it over several months, decided that they wanted to pursue removal of the Norfolk Island pine as well. And again, it's really just due to general decline in vigor. The committee reviewed the application. We reviewed the tree on site. There was consensus amongst the committee that the tree was in poor to fair health. There was agreement that there was very little in terms of like cultural intervention that would allow the tree to sort of rebound, and that it made practical sense to look at removal and replacement. And after review, the committee made a recommendation to approve the removal on the condition that a new tree that can achieve a minimum mature height at 25 feet be planted. And they recommended the commission could make the finding that principles of good forest management will be best served by the proposed removal.
Okay, thank you very much. Does anybody have any questions for Mr. Slack? Commissioner Chang?
Yeah, could you explain sort of why the tree was in poor health? Is there any indication of that?
Chair McGill and Commissioner Chang, we kind of were throwing around some ideas. There was nothing really clear-cut about it. I think we're seeing lots of decline in a lot of trees in town that you could probably lump to a huge part of it being, chronic drought stress over the last 10 years. It looks like maybe somebody did some really bad pruning, but at the same time, a lot of the broken limbs appeared to be, a lot of the limbs that were cut were broken, so it looked like maybe it was storm damage, a combination of those things. But there was really no clear-cut reason why. The tree was in a front yard, so things like root disturbance, were probably pretty minimal as well. Pretty puzzling, but not doing well.
No. Any other questions? Okay, if not, I do not have any speaker slips. Do we have anybody online?
We do not.
Okay. Thank you. So I will open it up for discussion and/or a motion. Okay. I'm prepared to make a motion that we, where is my, thank you, that we approve the request to remove the Norfolk Island pine on 229 Mohawk Road, conditioned on, what was the recommendation? Yes, I replace a tree with I would say replace it with a canopy tree that can achieve 25 feet, and on the principles of good forest management will be best served by the proposed removal.
I'll second that.
Okay, do we have any further discussion? All right, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay. And that takes us to the final one, which is the master plan.
And Chair McGill and Commissioners, the last Street Tree Advisory Committee recommendation for review is a request to modify the species designation for the 0 to 200 blocks of West Pueblo Street. So this kind of gets to Commissioner Aldana's earlier question about the designated street tree species for La Cadena. And I think our programs, like continued efforts to revisit and sort of reimagine the species designations and update, essentially. So and we're actively looking at replanting this street as part of our planting efforts this year. And the designated species is currently Cryptocarya alba. It doesn't have a common name. It used to go by Cryptocarya rubra and red laurel. It's impossible to find anymore. It's a neat little tree, but has fallen out of favor for one reason or another, and it's virtually impossible to find. We have a few scattered around town still, and in an attempt to try to maximize our planting efforts and canopy cover on street, determined it made practical sense to create a co-designation so that we had a little bit more flexibility. And after extensive discussion and review, the committee made a recommendation to co-designate Coast Live Oak. So we'll be retaining the designation of Cryptocarya alba as well, just in the off chance that maybe it becomes available again, or we're able to contract grow it or something like that. And I think it serves as like nice record of, these kind of unique and interesting species that were previously used, several decades ago as well.
Okay. Anybody have any questions? Okay. We have first Commissioner Aldana. Oh, no. Commissioner Chang. Wait. Okay. Commissioner Chang, then Commissioner Hernando-LaBerge.
Yeah, sorry, what is a co-designation?
Chair McGill and Commissioner Chang, so when we say co-designation, that just alludes to there being more than one designated street tree species. So if the commission approves this request, the designations will be the Coast Live Oak and also the Cryptocarya alba. And increasingly, as we modify these designations, we're looking at 3 to 5 species because it does several things. It increases the diversity on street, and it gives us a lot of utility in being able to choose different trees for different reasons. Something that works well under a utility line or in a smaller space that we could still utilize for a street tree that maybe a large one can't. So that's what co-designation just means, multiple designations for a street or a block segment.
Cool, thanks.
Great. Commissioner Hernando-LaBerge.
Okay, I've kind of asked you about this before with designations for trees and streets, and then when there's been a change, and you've kind of explained, well, maybe because it's not available anymore or it didn't really thrive in that environment. But I was kind of noticing on an area where near I live, there are a row of trees, and it gives a feeling to that block of when you have that continuity or consistency. And when we start, kind of changing, well, that's not really a convenient tree anymore, and then we start kind of peppering in some of these other ones, it kind of changes the feel. And I'm just wondering, do we ever really confer at all with the residents of those streets to say, what do you feel like if we take this feeling and this sense out and we change it with something completely different? Because I know as a resident on a street where there's 2 streets between one and then a perpendicular, there is a feeling. And if you guys were all of a sudden to start going, these are not convenient trees anymore, and start changing it, it would frustrate me as a resident to not have any input on that.
And Chair McGill and Commissioner Hernando-LaBerge, the one thing I can guarantee is that we're not making decisions out of convenience. These are, all decisions that we take very seriously, and I think most of the time are driven by really solid rationale, pest disease problems or just simply not being able to find it. Like we could retain Cryptocarya alba and never plant a street tree back on those streets, and try to find the tree for 10 years and never find it. I think there's always been this really interesting sort of talking point or argument about, single species streets and how fantastic that is and aesthetically appealing. Versus having a varied and very diverse mix of species that is much more sustainable and much more tolerant of pressures and not going to get wiped out when the, Dutch elm disease or something like that we've seen happen time and time again. Like communities got over-reliant on American elm, and then there was Dutch elm disease, and then there's the chestnut blight. We've just seen emerald ash borer kill billions of trees on the east, from the Rockies all the way to the East Coast. And so those are things that we're taking into consideration as well. And I would say, I think it's Almond Avenue that runs perpendicular to West Mitchell-Terrena.
Yes.
Has probably 10 different species of trees, and you drive it, and I think it evokes the exact same feel as a street that has nothing but the same species. It's different, but I think you still get the same vibe, the same aesthetics there. So I think it's something that's taken into great consideration. Engaging residents is a great idea. That becomes very difficult because there's wildly different opinions, and I think a lot of times what a resident wants to see doesn't end up making good practical sense from a street tree perspective. It's well, let's plant oranges and tangerines, and that would be cool, but a monumental challenge for us. But I'm sure there's a sweet spot there.
Thank you. Commissioner Clark.
buttons. Prior to Commissioner Nander-Leber's question and your response about diversity, I had raised my digital hand just to answer Commissioner Chang's question about co-designations and the importance of diversity, but I guess you were listening and Mr. Slack was just explaining it's not convenience and it's not just diversity for diversity's sake. It's, when that one star pine gets whatever hit it and it dies, if the whole street was star pines, they would all be dead. And so diversity will protect us against that one pest we're not expecting or that drought, well, the flood we're now expecting. So it's really co-designations are to protect our forests and our urban forests in the future. That's it.
Okay. Commissioner Aldana?
Does that take it all the way to the freeway? Because it's the 0, 100 to 200, it's 3 blocks.
No.
So why only 3 blocks?
Chair McGill and Commissioner Aldana, this designation will create consistency to the freeway?
It will?
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, I know 400 West Pueblo is where I go every day for hours, and it's all Coast Live Oak there now, right? Yeah.
Okay. All right. With that, I think we'll open up for public comment. There's nothing here. Do we have anything online?
We do not.
Okay. I think we've probably pretty much done the discussion as a part of the questions. So unless there is any further discussion, I'm ready to make a motion or entertain a motion. And I will move that we approve the changes to the street master plan and to designate, make a designation change for the 0 to 200 block of West Pueblo Street to the Coast Live Oak.
Second.
And we have a second. Do we have any further discussion?
Should we not hit the button for a second?
We haven't been, but
Just figuring it out.
we probably should. Okay, no discussion. All in favor? Aye. Opposed?
Aye.
All right. This is quite a little thing. Thank you very much. So that then,
Wait.
wait.
But, Mr. Slack, before you go, I was wondering, since we have several new commissioners, will we be looking at having that workshop with Stack and the commission sometime this year?
Chair McGill, Commissioner Clark, we can certainly do that. I was actually going to jump in before your next item and inform the commission, if you run out of things to do and go to the city's website and particularly type in urban forestry, we actually have our street tree inventory and the designation by streets online. So if you're curious to see it, you can see it. And it'll give you a great sense that we have a lot of diversity. In fact, we were and maybe still are Southern California with the greatest diversity of street trees. So there's some great resources. The community guide to tree planting is in there as well. Our urban forest management plan is in there. And that's also how we bring recommendations to you, is we're taking into consideration a lot of the policy discussion that we've had over the last 10 years about how to extend our urban forest for the next, I shouldn't say century, but 50 years plus, because our urban forest is aging. We do need, and we are facing climate change, and conditions on our streets are very different today than they were in 1920. And so we're finding that the decisions that should be made about this, the community's canopy, because this is our community's canopy, probably have to evolve. And so your questions and discussion is actually very valuable in our decision-making, and also for the community to understand how street trees are planted, why they're planted, and why they're important. But we do have some great resources on our webpage, and certainly feel free to direct any of your friends or colleagues to that as well.
Thanks. All right. That takes us to our director's report, which, Director Zachary, are you doing that, or is Rich?
Chair McGill and commissioners, I think are we doing director's report or community gardens first?
I've got community gardens after director's report.
Okay.
You had on the screen there before, it was
Okay. I've got number 4.
We do not have a PowerPoint for the director's report, so the next one just got put up.
Yeah,
so.
it's number 4 is director's report and 5 is the gardens.
Sure. Chair McGill, Commissioners, I can go through this very quickly. You have a lot of detail in your report about the January storm events. The community in many different ways was affected, and we thought it would be really informative and good to share with the Commission how our parks fared and what we've done to address some of the damage and sort of looking forward and moving forward. I think overall, we feel fortunate that there wasn't more damage to our public spaces in terms of parks and recreation facilities. Can't say the same for some of our street areas, clearly, because we had certainly some damage there. But really, it started before the rain even began because we've had a lot of surf and a lot of high tides. And if you have a moment and walk East Beach, you will see we have probably lost as much as 6 feet in depth. And I've been estimating as much as 20 or more feet in width, which has resulted in the exposure of the old road from the 1914 as well as the old revetment. So you can see essentially where the city once thought it would be a good idea to put a road, and after it washed out many times, actually built Cabrillo Boulevard, which is 200 feet north, depending on how you consider north, which is where it is today, because of exactly what we experienced in early January. This has been going on for 100 years. The intensity, the severity, and the frequency with which we will experience storms like that will only increase with sea level rise. And so those are some of the key questions we're also going to begin to grapple with as it comes to protecting our open spaces and public access areas along the coast. I can say that the Waterfront Department is actively engaged in starting up the dredging of the harbor, and the dredging of the harbor is what helps us maintain the sand on our beaches and creates the beach areas that we are very familiar with. We sustained damage in addition to the loss of sand and our great concern about the Cabrillo Pavilion, we lost 12 beach volleyball courts. So those are the courts that are east of Sycamore Creek. As the sand rebuilds, we'll hopefully put those back in. We've relocated some courts to West Beach in an interim to be able to continue to provide recreation programs. We also had quite a bit of sediment and debris in the Municipal Tennis Center. It is at or below sea level, depending on the day, and with the high tides and with the rain event, we have always historically suffered damage in terms of debris that enters the court. So all of that had to be cleared out. Our little pocket park over on Bath Street is adjacent to Mission Creek, and we know what happened when the creek and debris jumped in that area, so we also had damage as well there. We had some cliff erosion around 1,000 Steps, but staff were able to readily remove the debris, and the steps are open. If you do go to any coastal bluff area, you'll see some of our signs reminding people that it could continue to erode even though it has stopped raining. I'm just going to quickly look through there. We also had some damage in Stevens Park. McKenzie Park, we had a sinkhole. I mentioned 1,000 Steps, and then we had some trail washouts at Parma Park. Things that we can address. If you follow the trails discussion, we've had some pretty severe impacts to many trails in the front country. Significant. We're fortunate in that there are a number of organizations in the community, in addition to public agencies, actively trying to find ways to rebuild those trails, and expect to see a lot of trail work happening in the very near future. We had to close Los Baños Pool because of various reasons to manage the pool chemicals, and during storm events, if we deem it's for public safety, we close it anyway. And then, surprisingly, we didn't have as much tree loss as we anticipated, and we expect that's partially due to the fact we didn't have the high winds that they predicted. There were times where they were predicting winds as high as 50 to 70 miles an hour. We didn't have that. We did lose some trees. Our forestry staff logged a number of hours on call, standby, and addressing tree issues, but it wasn't nearly as bad as we feared it could be. So that's like a quick wrap up, and there is information on the city's website, County Office of Emergency Management, for people who have suffered personal losses. So the Federal Emergency Management Agency is in town. The city, the county are actively trying to find ways to connect people who have suffered losses with financial assistance. I'm the first to say I'm not the expert on it, but there are office hours at the East Side Library County Office of Emergency Management has information, and I know the library has been doing active outreach to many of their patrons on the east side. Switching gears fairly quickly, in a prior report, I think I mentioned that we applied for community priority funding for the Dwight Murphy Field renovation project. That was approved by Congress at the end of the calendar year. What that means is that we have $1.5 million that's been designated to go to construction of the Dwight Murphy Field project. We'll be working actively on the steps, the hoops, and all the other materials that we need to put together for the federal government in order to secure those funds. We really owe a big debt of gratitude to Congressman Carbajal and his staff for prioritizing that project along with 14 other ones in his region to take forward to Congress. They get a lot of requests, and we feel very fortunate that one of our requests did move forward and was funded. And with that, just quickly looking ahead to the next couple of commission agendas that we're considering and want to share with you. We're working on some policies and procedures related to commercial activities in our park areas. Our park staff, particularly Simone Herrera, our parks manager, is working with his staff to put together some pretty impressive turf and irrigation renewal projects, and these are ones that are being funded through ARPA funds, so recovery funds, after the pandemic that council approved, which is unheard of for us to actually have this kind of money for turf and irrigation, so we're pleased about that. And then because we weren't able to provide the capital projects for the golf fund at the capital presentation, thought we'd bring it forward as a standalone, in part because we want to be able to share with the commission the fact that the golf course is doing well enough financially that we can finally tackle some much-needed golf course improvements for the players' enjoyment, but also the not-so-fun stuff, infrastructure that needs to happen because the facility is more than 60 years old and nothing lasts forever. So we'll do that. And then, lo and behold, April is budget month, as it always is. There are many things that are coming forward with our new two-year plan. Won't let the cat out of the bag, but we'll be proceeding with some of the steps that are under discussion for achieving our Vision 2030 and what it means for Parks and Recreation.
Okay, great, thanks. Yeah, that was quite a storm and quite a response. As always, Parks and Recreation staff stepping up to the plate in a time of need and deserve to be recognized for doing what you always do in a time of need. I have, first on the docket is Commissioner Hernando Laberge, then Vice Chair Feck.
We all saw that fun picture of the, right where Shoreline and Ledbetter meet, the huge part of the cliff that looks like it's about to fall. Is that under Parks and Rec, or is that a different part of the city as far as programs, and is there a danger of that falling?
Commissioner Chair McGill, Commissioner Hernando Laberge, yes, that is technically part of Shoreline Park. It's not where people are supposed to go because we do have a fence there because of coastal bluff erosion. It has been inspected by Public Works staff, including engineering, and they've determined that it doesn't seem to be an imminent threat of crashing down, and if it does, it actually, if you look at Ledbetter Point from Ledbetter Beach, you see there's that ledge. So the idea is it will drop on that ledge and then dissipate. We do have signage up, hoping that people will take heed, although it is a popular location to watch surfers, even though we don't want folks there. But we are actively looking at that and monitoring cliff bluff erosion. It's something that just happens, and we hope that we get ahead of it before it actually occurs. But there's nothing we can necessarily do. We can't hold it in place. Not really thinking that trying to remove it is a good idea either, and but very much aware of the situation.
Thanks. Yeah, that was a dramatic picture. And Vice Chair Beck.
Yeah, so kind of a curiosity question. I think I saw it on Instagram. You guys had like a nice post about the volleyball courts and how you guys were able to pull the nets and stuff before there was too much damage. But just kind of curious, like from a dredging perspective, like how long does it take to like dredge up that amount of sand? And then just like from a financial perspective, I would assume that's probably pretty pricey, taking that it took a pretty big chunk of the courts. And then obviously with summer coming up.
Yeah, Chair Miguel, Commissioner Feck, great questions. The dredging of the harbor is actually funded by the federal government. There's a navigation channel, and so it's done through an Army Corps of Engineers contract. The first phase that Waterfront is organizing is kind of an emergency dredge to address navigation in the channel, and that will remove 330,000 cubic yards of sediment. Right now, I don't know if they've determined whether it can actually be channeled through pipes. When you see that black pipe that gets laid along the beachfront, that is moving the sediment, and it gets discharged at different locations depending on the beach conditions, and then also what the contractor chooses to do. So that's the first part. The regular dredge that happens in the spring, I believe, is going to start in February soon after that, and they're anticipating removing 240,000 cubic yards of sediment that will then get discharged. How much of it results in building the beach back? I don't have a good sense of how to describe that. I can say that if anybody here it was March 1st, March 3rd, 2014, when we had that crazy rain event, that was the last time we lost a significant amount of beach. It was 9 years ago almost, but we did recover a lot of the beachfront. I don't know if Recreation Manager Rich Hanna has anything else he wants to say to this topic.
Thank you.
Commissioner Chang?
Sure. You mentioned that the number of trees, the tree loss was low. Can you just put some numbers around that, your expectations versus actual trees lost? Just curious.
Chair McGill, Commissioner Chang, we don't have the number in here. I don't know, and I don't recall off the top of my head, but less than 20 is probably a very good guess. We've lost more in the past. And that's just trees that we would address, right? So we're not talking about trees that might have been lost on private property, that private owners. But we can get back to you. I had the number, but it didn't make it into the report, and at the moment I can't remember it.
Sure, that's fine. Thank you.
Okay. That's all the questions I have for the director's report. Thanks very much. And now we're at community gardens. And it looks like Rich Hanna is going to be presenting.
Yes, good afternoon, Chair McGill and Commissioners. Rich Hanna, Recreation Manager. I'm here to present the Community Gardens Program Report. This program lives in the Community Services section inside the Recreation Division, and it requires a team to manage, so I'm joined by Recreation Supervisor Michelle McDonald, Recreation Coordinator 2, Ricardo Venegas, and who cannot be here is our grounds maintenance worker, Levesque Kyle, who does a lot of the maintenance in our community gardens. So just by way of presentation overview, we have not done a standalone community gardens report to the Commission for over 10 years, so I am going to provide a little bit of background. I think that will help as we move through this presentation. We'll talk about garden management improvements, which gets to the one plot per household, the annual renewal period, and some enforcement procedures that are all contained inside the rental agreement that is an attachment in your packet. We'll talk a little bit about the budget and financial information associated with managing the garden program, and then a recommendation for the Commission to consider at the end of this presentation. So I think there's a general consensus inside any community that a community garden provides residents with their own yard space. And as we see in Santa Barbara, as we become more and more dense, there's more and more of a need for people to use our parks and our public spaces to recreate. The community gardens obviously provide an affordable social and recreational activity for our residents. It promotes healthy lifestyles. It assists participants to improve the nutrition and health of their family and friends, and in a lot of cases may also supplement their weekly food consumption within inside their household and reduce some of their outgoing costs. The department currently manages 2 community gardens. We've been managing gardens since the mid-1970s, I think. And so we've morphed over time through different myriads of management, but currently we're managing the Rancheria Gardens, which is located in the Lower West Side, and then the Yananali Gardens, which is located in the East Side Neighborhood Park. As I mentioned before, the Recreation Division provides overall garden management, so that includes everything from calls, inspections, facilitating the rental process, communications, all of those types of activities. And then our Parks Division provides limited maintenance support to keep really the common areas of the garden maintained and accessible, and then any sort of debris removal or other items that come up as needed. Just to give you a little bit of a context, for Rancheria, we have 47 garden plots, and you can see that on the left of your presentation. And then at Yananali, we have historically had 87 garden plots. We've recently removed 5 as part of the East Side Neighborhood Park Improvement Project with the fence relocation. Those plots will return as part of the garden renovations, which we believe may start as early as this fall, as well as additional plots that we'll be adding through that outreach that we did with the community. All of the plots in the gardens, for the majority, are 10 by 20. However, we have some smaller plots in both gardens that were ultimately communal plots for the process of people sharing herbs and other types of things that they may want to share with their other gardeners. And we're bringing some of those elements back to the Yananali Gardens through that renovation project as well. The park hours for our gardens, they're open daily, consistent with park hours. So they're open at sunrise. They close 1/2 hour after sunset. Gardeners are provided either a combination lock access code to get access to the gardens. As part of the garden renewal project at Yananali, we'll be switching that garden to a key fob system, which will allow for better security of the gardens, more controlled access, but actually allow the gardeners an easier way to access the gardens than always looking around a combination lock at early hours or late at night. The gardens are not open for public use. Some community gardens are. Carpinteria specifically was developed inside of a community park, so it's actually open to the public to come in and actually recreate in that space. Our gardens are not. They're really exclusive, dedicated plots for the people that rent them for the purpose of growing produce. We facilitate an annual application and renewal rental period. And as I mentioned before, staff on a weekly basis, we go out, we review active and vacant garden plots, and I'll talk how that ties into some of the recommendations we're making. We identify the number of plots that we have vacant, the number that are active, some that are abandoned, so that we have an accurate number. We will look at completing the gardener application process, which takes over a month, so we typically notify gardeners a month ahead of that time. We facilitate the rental application process, and then the growing period or the actual season starts from that point forward. So as I'll talk about in the presentation, I'll show you how that phases into today's recommendation. Gardeners are required to review and agree to the rental agreement. We use that to hold the gardeners both accountable for following the rules of the garden, but also just making sure that the aesthetics and the materials and the activity that are going on in the gardens are at an acceptable level and something that they've agreed to. And then the staff goes forward and then assigns garden plots. For individuals that are requesting to retain their plot, they retain their plot. Some gardeners are requesting to move to a different location inside the garden. We can facilitate that based on our wait lists. And then any new garden spots that we have open, we make available to those that are on the wait lists. The gardeners pay a minimal annual rental fee. It's $67. That includes the water for the gardens, trash and green waste services, weekly maintenance of common spaces. It also pays for the administration and management of the program, which I referenced earlier, which is the vacant and inactive plots, the unwanted debris, any sort of missing equipment or needed repairs, and then any enforcement or debris removal is all covered inside of that $67 annual fee. Just before I get into the nuts and bolts of the rental agreement and some of the changes, I just wanted to give you an idea of an abandoned garden plot. So to the left is something that you would see as abandoned. This is not something that happens overnight. So it's something that staff are aware of. They've already been in contact with the gardener on a number of numerous occasions before any sort of written notification or formal notification is provided to them. To the right, you'll see unwanted debris that accumulates in the garden spaces. We can receive anything from tubs and growing structures to bird baths and fountains and a lot of other items that I won't go into a lot of detail on. However, this generates a lot more requests for park services to remove this debris from the gardens beyond what we would be doing in terms of maintaining the regular communal spaces. So as part of this process, we've been working on this probably for over a year. It really started picking up some momentum as part of the Eastside Neighborhood Park improvements and the Yananali Garden changes that were proposed as part of that. It gave us the opportunity to go back and look at our current management practices, things we would like to see put in place. We did go through, we've looked at our colleagues in other cities' municipal-owned gardens, so we've talked to folks in Carpinteria, Santa Maria, San Luis Obispo, Ventura. We've looked at all their policies and procedures. We've evaluated things that they do well. We've done site visits. We've looked at best practices in garden management. And staff determined that our existing guidelines in some cases were outdated. We really felt like we could make things more concise, more clear, more understandable to the gardener, and also easier for staff to manage. So we've reduced your garden application rental agreement, and there's 2 pages. At one point, it was 5 pages. We've shortened that to 2 to make it more succinct and actually contain all of the things we need to manage the garden successfully. We've also developed very clear guidelines with an attempt to reduce wait lists and increase garden access, align an annual renewal period with the growing season, and then we've updated our enforcement procedures as well. So by way of reducing wait lists and increasing access, the department through this process is proposing that we return to a 1 plot per household recommendation. It was the way the gardens were initially intended to be, so it was 1 plot per household. During the recession or the economic downturn back in 2007, 2008, we had a lot of open garden spaces, and at that time, staff were doing everything we could to increase revenue so we didn't have to make additional cuts. And so if we had individuals on the wait list looking to have an additional garden plot at that time, we did go ahead and rent an additional garden plot. We currently have 24 duplicate plots, and that's basically the second plot for another member of the same household. We hope that going through this process, we will increase, we will actually create 24 new plots for people to actually take advantage of. Plus, we have a number of plots that are currently abandoned or vacant, or we just have annual turnover. So even though we, through this process of 1 plot per household, we're only referencing 24 people off the waiting list, there's more than that that actually move on an annual basis. This will increase the garden access by reducing the wait lists. The wait lists go back, and I've tried to tie this back, and I'm sure Mr. Venegas would correct me if I'm wrong, but the wait lists go back at least a decade. We fact-checked them back in March of 2022, so we went back and re-engaged everybody on the wait list to make sure that they were still actively looking to have a garden plot, so we knew what our numbers were moving forward. So we have 96 total people on the wait list. You can see there's a higher request for Rancheria Gardens with 58, and at Yananali it's 38. And then, as I referenced earlier, when we do the Yananali Garden improvements, we'll be adding, I believe it's 12 additional plots to the Yananali Garden site, as well as maintaining all of the existing 10 by 20 plots at that location. One of the things we also received input on as we were doing stakeholder outreach, and we also conducted a survey, was moving the annual renewal period. We've shifted it over time. We've done calendar years, we've done fiscal years, because it's easier to budget the revenues and the expenditures and to manage those costs. What we really heard back from the gardeners was their interest in aligning it with the growing season, because we could actually find that somebody wants to come in and actually just grow for a season and then forfeit their plot voluntarily. We'd be able to turn that over for somebody that maybe wanted a second growing season. So we had a lot of input on this. We were checking with other municipalities, and so what we've ultimately decided to do is move the renewal period back to a calendar year, which would be effective January 1st. This year, because the renewal period will not begin until March 2023, so based on Commission's recommendation today, we would go out and notify all the gardeners February 1st to renew. The actual period would start 2023, and the fees would be prorated for January and February. Throughout this process, the department has not charged any fees to gardeners as part of this fiscal year. So since July of 2022, there's been no charges to the gardeners for use of the community gardens for growing and all of the management and water costs. And then as it pertains to the enforcement procedures, we've provided you with a new community garden rental agreement. We feel that it sets clear expectations for gardeners. It addresses garden access, plot use, and maintenance. The gardeners are required for maintaining their plot, their actual garden plot that they rent, and in some ways the immediate area adjacent to that plot. The department is required to manage all of the common spaces, so that's the pathways, the sheds, some of the areas where we have our green waste containers, or at times when we bring in mulch and other garden materials for the gardeners to use, we would maintain those spaces as well. It also addresses structures and furnishings and then any sort of unauthorized plantings. It also establishes consistent enforcement procedures. It talks through violations, notifications, non-compliance, forfeiture. One of the biggest changes is that we have traditionally provided gardeners with a 15-day opportunity to remedy a violation. We've recommended shortening that to 7 days, and as I spoke to the commission earlier, plots do not become abandoned in a 1-week period of time, and so we are constantly engaging with these gardeners. Obviously, any sort of unwanted debris or illegal materials in the gardens, we want to make sure that gets addressed within a very quick period of time, because we hear a lot about aesthetics and impacts to other gardeners and their satisfaction in the garden environment when we do not address these in a timely manner. I would also add that when we did the survey back in 2022 in April, over 85% of the gardeners that responded actually spend a minimum of 1 time a week in the garden, with most of the gardeners spending anywhere from 2 to 3 times a week in their garden. So these are garden plots that are supposed to be actively used and for the right reasons, and so we felt that the requirement compliance within 7 days is reasonable. You may ask what compliance is. We would like to see them come in and completely remedy whatever violation there is. However, if they are in the process of working through that and they're working with staff and we can see that there will be an end goal to getting to that point, we will work with those gardeners through that process. Under the other previous enforcement procedures, we would see somebody go out, they'd pull some weeds, the garden would look okay, and then we would have to come back a month later and restart the enforcement procedure moving forward. So our recommendation as part of that is also that all compliance is done within 7 days of receiving written notification from staff. Just by way of budget and financial information, the garden as a whole, when you look at the revenues and the expenditures, is about a little over $80,000 to manage. I think you'll hear more and more about this as we go through the budget and how the department sets fees for things that are community benefit, for things that we assess for youth programs versus adult programs. I don't want to talk too much about it now, but you'll be hearing more about all of how we levy fees and what the purpose is as we go through the budget process. But in terms of the operating budget, we're talking staffing, supplies, water, and routine maintenance. I will tell you that Mr. Venegas here spends probably 10 hours a week of his time, whether it's facilitating calls, doing garden inspections, out in the gardens meeting with gardeners. Mr. Kyle, our grounds maintenance worker, is spending on average 15 hours a week in a garden or the gardens combined, depending on the season, the rains, the weeds, all those types of things. So it is pretty labor intensive. It's not we just take these rental fees and we let the gardeners do their thing and we respond when there's a problem. We're actually out there actively trying to manage the gardens and keep them correctly and aesthetically pleasing. When we look at our revenue from the fees that we generate, it's a small amount, and so when we look at a department subsidy, and this is kind of how we report budget to council and other people, is we subsidize the cost of operating the gardens to the tune of about 88%. So with that, I'm going to put the recommendation up, but I'm going to then open it up for any sort of questions. But today's recommendation would be that the commission concur with the staff recommendation to implement the proposed policy and procedure changes beginning February 1st, 2023. We would come out of this meeting, we would then notify the gardeners, facilitate that process through the month of February, and people would be in their garden plots. Well, they're already in their garden plots, but new gardeners would be in their garden plots starting March 1st, 2023. Through the rest of the 2023 calendar year. So I'm going to leave the recommendation up, and I'm happy to answer any questions that the commission has as it relates to the presentation or the program as a whole. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Mr. Hanna. What I would suggest is that to the degree possible, and I know this doesn't always work this way, we start with questions, and then once we've got questions addressed, go to comments, and then we will need to make a motion to concur or not with the staff recommendation on the garden changes. And, I recognize that questions and comments often blur, but we'll try it that way. I have Commissioner Chang, and so we will go ahead. Go ahead.
When was the fee last updated?
Chair McGill and Commissioner Chang, we look at our fees every year. We actually had proposed the fee increasing from $67 to $70 in the current fiscal year. However, we haven't implemented that fee. Prior to that, the fee was increased the year before by 2%. So typically with our neighborhood leases for nonprofits and our rental community gardens, we typically look at a 2 to 3% increase per year. So the short answer to your question is we did try to increase it as part of the current fiscal year budget, but we have not been able to charge that fee at this time.
So what's the barrier to that? Is just like an internal decision, or?
Correct. With the evaluation of this program, we have not been charging any fees. So even though the fee was approved by the commission and city council to put into place for fiscal year 23 at $70, we haven't charged that. We will be charging the $70 on a prorated basis once we launch this program in March.
And what are other, sorry, can we do it back and forth here?
Yeah, I know that Director Zachary's, were you trying to respond to that as well?
Chair
Otherwise, I'll
McGill,
let you
actually,
jump to-
I think if Commissioner Chang wants to continue to ask questions, I can fill in afterwards if that's okay with you.
Okay, great.
So what are other such programs charging? Have you seen comparisons?
Chair McGill and Commissioner Chang, so when we did our comparison with other municipal gardens, we did find that we're in alignment with a lot of the other gardens in terms of charging. I would say that for San Luis Obispo and Santa Maria and Ventura, for Carpinteria, their plots are smaller, and if you took the size of our plot based on their fee, we're actually charging 1/3 of what their fee would be in Carpinteria. So we're significantly cheaper than Carpinteria. Based on our plot size and our annual fee, but we're in alignment with, say, Santa Maria and San Luis Obispo and Ventura.
Got it, thanks. Why are these plots being abandoned?
Chair McGill and Commissioner Chang, I may have Mr. Venegas come up and speak to this. I will try. I think the price is cheap. People come in and they have an expectation to use the garden to grow and cultivate things and then just don't have the time commitment to continue that. We at least on occasion see people get through one growing season, so we see a lot of the plot abandonment after the primary growing season per year. But I think it's really just, it's a nice to have, but there's no commitment that the gardeners spend any amount of maximum or minimum time in the gardens. And so I would say that's why we find the plots to be most abandoned.
Thank you, I'll get back in line.
Yeah.
Chair McGill, if I could just add, I think the concept of community gardens is that it provides an opportunity for someone without yard space, perhaps living in an apartment of lower income, to experience growing food for their family in an environment that is aesthetically pleasing. It's in a park, it's a public area. I've been to many different community gardens throughout this country and as well as in Canada, and it really depends on how they're managed. Actively managed gardens, which are sometimes managed with a nonprofit does it, and our gardens were once upon a time managed by the Community Environmental Council. And the engagement of the gardeners, there's different terms and conditions in order to be a gardener beyond just having access to a plot, actually actively engaged in managing the garden. You do find that there is always a percent of people that think it's a great idea, and then it's sometimes it's hard to follow through. It's another task. When I first moved to Santa Barbara, I had a community garden plot at Pilgrim Terrace. But I was at a time in my life where it was really easy for me to find time to do that kind of thing because I didn't have other responsibilities. And so that's the challenge we face, is it's an exclusive use in a public space. We want to have some of that in our city, in our community. Other gardens are cropping up around Santa Barbara. Churches are providing them. There are other ways to provide this service to the community. How do we balance what we can do with what's reasonable to subsidize? Those are the questions that we'll increasingly ask. As I mentioned in the presentation, I believe it was in November, about Vision 2030, is the city looking at prioritizing its services and finding ways to leverage what it has, which doesn't mean we have stopped doing things, but how to think carefully about what we're doing and why we're doing it.
Okay, thank you. All right, I'm going to go to Commissioner Aldana, then Commissioner Clark.
Yes, on the rental fees, for the residents, you have $70, and then you have non-residents, $84. It's a community garden. Can you define the non-resident?
Chair McGill and Commissioner Aldana, we, as part of this process, let me step back. All of our fees and charges have a resident and a non-resident rate. That's something that we've been doing for a long time. If you live outside the city of Santa Barbara limits, you're not contributing to the city's tax revenues and tax base, so you would pay the nonprofit rate. As we've gone through this process, we feel like there is a significant demand for the plots by residents in this community, and so we're actually looking at just renting our plots to residents first and then non-residents after that, so we will be coming right now with the one flat fee of $70. Does that make sense?
Yes, so basically it's just for residents only right now currently?
We,
Because you have a waiting list, but then you got non-residents, so.
and we have the ability to, as we go through that process, make sure that we're prioritizing residents over non-residents that are on that wait list and notifying them that they will not have a spot in these gardens unless we reach that point.
Wow, okay, thank you. And then also there was a written email. Can that be put on the screen and can we touch on that?
So there are two
I'm
emails.
familiar with the emails. I'm familiar with the emails. Is there a question specifically that you had about it?
Well, I just like to, maybe we could touch on it, just go over it and address the concern of the,
Do you have
And
I think it'd be, if you have a specific question to either, we've had two emails about the gardens, and I think if you have, and
Yeah.
I have a couple specific questions to those emails, and which I
if
can,
you have a copy,
I do not have a copy
yeah,
with
I
me.
left it on my dash.
So I can ask my questions when we get to me, and if that addresses your questions, great, but otherwise, I think we should, rather than review the contents of the email, I think it'd be better just take it as a question basis.
Very good, thank you.
Okay, so I've got Commissioner Clark, then technically we got Commissioner Chang next, but you've already had to go, so I'm going to go to Commissioner Hernandez-LaBerge after Commissioner Clark. If you're okay with that.
Yeah, I'll be quick. I did read both letters, and I can't imagine a circumstance in which 7 days would be too short. If someone abandoned their garden because they were injured or sick, or they had to leave to help a family member, and that's why the garden got abandoned, they might not be checking their mail, they might not be checking their emails for like 2-3 months. I can see that. And it seems like these gardens are really hard won, and people don't want to lose them, but sometimes life takes us places we don't expect. What will happen in that circumstance?
Sure, Chair McGill and Commissioner Clark, there is a provision within inside the rental agreement that gives us the latitude to work with gardeners that are sick or are injured, to work with them through that process. So we would not go to a forfeiture type situation. And we were already dealing with that inside of our existing policies and procedures. So if somebody was to notify us that they were, that they couldn't maintain their garden because they had something coming up that would prevent them from coming in and maintaining it, we would not go through the forfeiture process. We would work with them to the best of our ability to make sure that the garden stays maintained without us doing a significant amount of work, but they wouldn't forfeit their garden through that process.
And if you didn't hear back from them in, say, a month, what would you assume that they were having a hardship, or would you just move forward if you hadn't heard back at all?
It's a great question. I would say we probably go out of our way to reach the gardeners. We try to do email communication. We still use written communication. We also, with Mr. Venegas being on site, we've even gone and knocked on people's doors that we haven't seen show up in the gardens. It's a pretty tight-knit community, so we do everything in our power. It's not our goal to forfeit a plot if somebody cannot be there for a reason that prevents them from being there. It's more of the waning interest in them coming in and maintaining the plot that leads us to that process of forfeiture.
Okay, great, thank you. And then another quick question I had is if it's time for renewal, the person who has that garden or just got a spot just doesn't have the $70 right then, could they owe you and say, I'll pay it next month, or I'll pay it in 2 months?
Chair McGill and Commissioner Clark, I don't believe we've done that. We don't do that with any of our programs and services because we've found that even though the intent may be good, we end up spending a lot of time chasing down those fees. We have that come up with recreation programs and facility rentals. I think somebody knowing that the cost would be $70 and they have an entire year to pay for that, I think it's an affordable fee. So if they couldn't, we would need to move that plot to somebody that could pay for it.
Okay.
Okay, thanks. Commissioner Nander LaBerge.
I'm just going to clarify, this goes back to what Commissioner Alnano was talking about. Your 70 versus 84 is similar to the camp program.
Commissioner Nander LaBerge, thank you.
Similar to the camp programs where non-city residents can participate, but there's a different fee because they're not paying into the city taxes and things.
Commissioner Nander LaBerge, that's correct. That would be, a non-city resident that wants to participate in a city program would have to pay the 10% increase, and for facility rentals, it's 20%. But again, we're really trying to bring this program back to serving our residents first and foremost.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks. Okay, Commissioner Chang, and then I'm going to jump in.
Okay, great. So you note that 30% of total garden plots are inactive or abandoned. Over what time frame is that number calculated?
That would be over the 1 year of the entire rental period. So when we look at a 1 year snapshot, we would say 30% over that growing period, or over that rental period, 30% of the plots are inactive. And that would be between both gardens.
Okay, and what's the churn on the gardeners in the existing gardens on an annual basis?
Commissioner, can you repeat the question? I didn't.
So churn as in, how many gardeners are leaving, are just, they quit their contracts at the end of the year?
We don't quit, we just abandon.
What's the turnover?
Yeah, Commissioner Chang, I would say there's really not a lot of turnover. They just kind of quit showing up. But I would say this year, as Mr. Venegas has been out and keeping us updated as we've been going through this, we probably see anywhere from 10 to 12 gardeners, specifically at Yananali, and probably half that at Rancheria, just abandon their plots and walk away.
Oh, okay, and they don't re-up their contracts?
Correct.
Oh, and so how does that square with the wait list going back a decade then?
It's a great question. So what we try to do is usually in the past, when we have a plot that's vacated throughout the period of the year, we have not been very proactive in going out and trying to rent that plot to somebody on the wait list. Because they've paid for the year, we have assumed that they own that plot for a year, and our forfeiture and our violation policies have not allowed us to basically turn that plot over and re-rent it to somebody on the wait list.
Got it. And have you considered switching to a monthly fee instead of an annual one?
That's also another great question. We looked at that. It becomes a little bit more of an administrative task on our staff, and we're already spending quite a bit of time dedicated to this. Carpinteria does a a fee twice a year, and we looked at exploring that. Their fees are higher, but they currently have very little, if zero, turnover in their gardens, so they're administering a fee twice a year for the same gardeners. So we opted to just stay with the once-a-year fee.
Okay, got it. Thank you. I will stop asking questions before I wake up with a spade in my back.
You know, new commissioners are great. We all learn things that we think we should know, but don't. So, so have at it. So just for clarity, I mean, I know I noticed the non-resident fee as well, and my little note is, why are we allowing this at all? So are there going to be any non-residents grandfathered in once we institute the new policy, and would we consider not doing that if that's the case?
So Chair McGill, we've discussed that. We felt that people that are currently renting the garden and are in good standing that are non-residents, we would grandfather them in. We do not have a lot of those members currently, but going forward, we would no longer permit non-residents to rent a community garden plot at our two gardens.
Yeah.
And I would say part of it is we recognize that the gardeners themselves put in an investment to these gardens. So we've talked a lot about the forfeiture and the challenges that staff deal with, but there are a lot of costs that gardeners invest in their gardeners, whether it's gopher wire and the materials and the soils and how they manage that and their produce and so forth. So we recognize that, and that's why we're going to take the grandfather approach for those that are non-residents that are currently using our garden plots.
Okay, yeah, no, I think I see that balance question coming, because there is a lot of investment in those $600 tomatoes. And so then going back to one of the letters that we received, there was a query about the possibility of taking some space in city space and creating new gardens from it to address the wait list. Has that been discussed? Do you have any comment about that? I see that Director's out.
Chair McGill, I might start, and then I'll turn it over to Director Zachary. So I do think it's important to note that we did survey what else is going on in the Santa Barbara area. So there's also the Pilgrim Terrace Gardens, and I know they're going through a renovation right now. We looked at the Trinity Gardens on North Lacumba Road. They have vacancy. There's also the Santa Barbara Seventh-day Adventist Church, which is kind of in the Hope Ranch Annex area. They have current vacancies in their plots. And Elings Park recently just did a big project up on one of their quadrants of the park with the Bucket Brigade to initiate a new community garden program. So I don't know that it's Parks and Recreation's responsibility to address all the community garden needs in this community. I would also add that just to give a little bit of context, because we had to do this as it related to the Yananelli Gardens, is, as Ms. Zachary said, this is dedicated and exclusive use, which means this really precious park and outdoor space is only for a very small number of people that get to use it. And if you look at Yananelli Gardens, for example, it's 37,000 square feet. It's just below an acre, but it takes up 35% or almost 40% of the entire East Side Neighborhood Park. And so when we really look at spaces becoming more dense and where people need to recreate, I think having places that serve a larger, broader sense of the community than dedicating it to community gardens is an approach that I think the department has considered, and I don't believe we're looking at adding additional community garden space at this time.
Yeah, understood, and that explanation makes sense, particularly, and maybe people aren't aware of all the community garden resources that are out there, but you're right, they are out there.
Chair McGill?
Oh, yes.
If I could just add, I mean,
Yes.
I think, the history of community gardens in Santa Barbara is laudable. And, the first sort of community garden was El Marisol, which is where Alice Keck Park Memorial Garden is today. And so that was started 69, 70 at the time when environmentalism was growing, when there were a lot of activities in Santa Barbara related to that. And I'm not familiar with the community garden movement. What we're finding today is we have greater demands on our limited recreation areas. When we start looking at converting an existing park space to another use, we really have to look at the whole park system. We did a very thorough study, for example, of where we might locate a fenced off-leash dog park, and looked at every single site in the city and looked at the constraints and opportunities, who it would serve, what it would displace, and whether it was appropriate for that use. And we ended up with 3 or 4 locations, with the most ideal being Mackenzie Park, because it wasn't being used for any other purpose. It was easily accessible by many residents in the area. There's a parking lot, so you can also drive there if you don't live in north of state, and it's been highly successful as a result. We also have to consider the cost to maintain. So you have before you what it costs us to maintain parking, community garden plots, basically for 134 people. It works out to about $550 per plot per year.
Yeah.
And that's just the maintenance that we have. And of course, we would love it to look perfect all the time, but it can't because we don't have the resources to do that. And the same thing goes for an off-leash dog area. The amount of FIBAR that we have to put in that off-leash dog area is tremendous, and it's an ongoing cost. And as we look ahead and think about our resources and potentially better aligning our resources with the funding that we have, we want to take into consideration the benefits that those resources bring to the larger community. At the same time, I think we could also, spend more time directing people to other community garden locations. I think part of our reason for doing that research is to be able to share with folks that may not know, for example, that there is one over in the Hope Ranch area, and it's been established. I think it's fairly new. It might be in the last 5 to 8 years that I've noticed it because I pass through there on a regular basis. But otherwise, I wouldn't know that it existed.
Okay, yeah, thanks. This is a bit rhetorical, but it's just to clear on the other email that we got. There was a request to have more, basically a dedicated gardener, and a gardener that is mindful of weed seeds. And with an 88% subsidy going already, I think I know the answer to the dedicated gardener question. And I know the staffing, but I throw it out there.
Sure, Chair McGill and Commissioners. So the weed whipping seed cross-germination, point taken. I think we can work with staff to the best of our ability to hopefully not generate that problem moving forward. I think you nailed it on the head, and Ms. Zachary alluded to, it's the cost of operating a garden. I can share with you that when we looked at the other gardens, the one that stands out the most is the most actively managed is the Carpinteria Community Gardens. They actually have somebody that works in the garden almost 1,000 hours a year. They get paid somewhere to the tune of $25,000 to $30,000 to be in the garden 2.5 days a week. They also require their gardeners to commit a certain number of hours to coming in and working in the gardens, but that works because they have a dedicated person in the garden to do that. And that is over and above what it takes to operate the gardens just from water and all of the other resources. So if we were to look at having a more of a dedicated full-time garden person working in our gardens, that cost that you saw I would eventually say would probably double.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay, I think I'll stop there. And we have Commissioner Aldana, Commissioner Nander-LaBerge, and then I think we go to any further discussion and then a recommendation. Commissioner
Yes,
Aldana.
going back to the non-resident, what is your guess on the percentage of non-residents?
Chair McGill and Commissioner Aldana, this is just a guess. We're going to say 10%? 10%, but I'd be happy to follow up with the commission with an actual number. I just do not have that number for you today.
Okay, thank you.
And Commissioner Nander-LaBerge.
Thank you. You mentioned, with the competing use as we're becoming more of a dense community and open spaces becoming, a premium as far as needing to be able to have a place to go. But as we are becoming a more dense community, it also means that there are fewer people that have access to even a basic space to do some gardening, and it's, for some people, very cathartic and therapeutic. Is there not opportunity to balance that a little bit more? And I understand you're kind of weighing things, but it just seems like with the wait list that we have, and yes, there are other community spaces, but for some reason, and maybe it's the price point, and I don't know as far as what the other communities offer for their gardens, in our area. But it kind of speaks volumes to what you pointed out of, we need that open space as we become more dense with our development, and even more so for gardens.
Sure. Chair McGillen, Commissioner, and Andrew LaBerge, it would be inappropriate for me to speak about the future of how we go. I think Ms. Zachary spoke about how we evaluate the park system as a whole and what's the right fit. I would share with you that through several of the master plan efforts that this department has initiated, where we are seeing the biggest demand for the community use our spaces is open turf spaces that can be used year-round, that serve significantly higher numbers of community residents engaged in a number of different activities, and it's not dedicated. And so when I look at a garden space like this that really is serving a finite number of people compared to tens of thousands of people that may want to use a synthetic turf field that serves a lot of people in a community, or just even any sort of turf space that can be used for a variety of different reasons, I think that's a higher priority to the community based on the master plan processes that I've been involved with. And I was involved with the Dwight Murphy and the Ortega master plans, and both of those resonated the highest, that people were looking for more turf space year-round. And then it was a bunch of other recreational elements, and then things like dog parks were very low, and then there was no recommendation for community gardens at that point.
In a perfect world, which we are not in. Yeah. Okay, I think with that, we have a recommendation, which I certainly am prepared to support. The only, further comment I would make, I think that you guys have done a great job. If I were to be suggesting anything, it would be that you consider phasing out the grandfathering of the non-residents. So don't kick them out next year, but just say, give notice that in, is it 3, is it 5, whatever it is, that the grandfathering of non-residents be phased out. Any other discussions? Other than that, I think we would need a motion to concur with the recommendation. Commissioner Clark, you have come on.
I'll make a motion that we agree with the staff recommendation to implement the proposed policy and procedure changes to the community garden program beginning February 1st, 2023.
I'll second.
Okay. You went back on, was that a?
No, I'm not.
Okay. Oh, you're off now? All right, so any further discussion?
Yes.
Commissioner Aldana?
Did the motion need that comment about the grandfathering?
No, I did not. I did not. That was I think that was a personal recommendation. I don't. Sorry, I pushed the wrong button. I actually don't agree with that. So that was not in my recommendation motion.
Got it.
And I'm prepared to have that as something for the team to consider, as opposed to a part of the recommendation.
Chair McGill, could you repeat that? The consideration in addition to the recommendation?
Oh, the consideration was that the non-residents be phased out, not grandfathered in perpetuity. Try that one at 6 o'clock.
But that was not part of the motion.
But it was not, I recognize that was not part of the motion, and or the second, and I am personally comfortable with that. All right, with that, I think we can go to a vote. All in favor? Aye. Opposed? Great, thank you very much. Thank you for a really comprehensive look at the policy and procedures and for this report. And that new community garden at Eleen's is actually pretty cool. Yeah, if you go up it's the Cliff Road. You go up that. Yeah, you just, yeah. Okay, so that takes us, we are at the Golf Advisory Committee, and we had, thank you guys, we had one appointment that we did not make last time. It is a vacancy from the Men's Club, and we have a applicant, Dominic Namneth, which I'm sure I just mispronounced. And we have the application from him. I do not have a speaker slip for him. Do we have?
Chair Miguel, he is here.
Okay. I thought I recognized, yeah, I thought you were here, but, so if you would like to come up, and you can just do a slip on your way out so that we have it for the record.
Okay.
And then you will set the timer for 2 minutes, yes?
Well, good evening. I learned a lot about trees and gardens today. My name's Dominic Namneth. I've been on the GAC for 15, 16 years, I guess, at this point. I've been the chair for probably 10 or so. Right now, it's a pretty easy position. It's not always been that way. 6 or 7 years ago, with that transition from the city over to a new provider, was pretty hectic, but we got through, and I think we're doing really well. The Golf Advisory Committee plays an important role, just like you guys do, in understanding what's important to the golfers and the stakeholders at the golf course, and running the meetings and doing it efficiently, and kind of herding the cats sometimes is not always fun, but they keep asking me to do it, so I'm here to get approval, I guess, to continue on.
Okay.
54 seconds left.
You've got plenty of time left, but that's okay. All right. Are you there? You done?
Yeah, you have any
Great.
questions
Okay,
for me?
thanks. No, Commissioner Clark.
I just wanted to thank you for your 15 or so years of service and commitment. I know if Commissioner Longstreet was still with us, she would have been really eloquent and she would have had your entire history. But in my time here, I've been appreciative of what you've done, and I'm glad you're back.
You're very welcome.
Yeah. We appreciate
The
all the
retirement
effort.
pension is going to be fantastic.
Yes, like ours. All right. Any questions, discussion? I am prepared to make a motion that we reappoint Dominic Nemeth to the Golf Advisory Commission.
I'll second.
All right, discussion. All in favor? Aye. Opposed? Welcome back.
Thank you. It's not going to go 15 rounds?
No. Well, you got 53 more seconds.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for waiting all meeting.
Okay, and that takes us to the last thing on our agenda, which is our annual appointment of advisory committee liaisons. I've only had one person soliciting me to keep their roles. Does anybody, and I see, and we have one vacancy, which is the golf course, and we have one unassigned person to my left. Vice Chair Feck, you are now on Creeks and Youth Council. So,
I'd like to ask if I could leave the Creeks and just focus on Youth Council. To kind of try something new.
okay.
I haven't really been involved in the Youth Council at all, just because I think Jacob's taken the lead on that one. And then for Creeks, I feel like I never can go because it's either scheduled when we have this meeting, or it gets canceled. So kind of want to try something different.
Okay. So, Commissioner Aldana, you right now are the alternate for Creeks. Are you willing, but you also are Neighborhood Advisory Council. Do you have time or energy to take on Creeks, or is there anybody else who would like to take on Creeks?
It's on the third Wednesday.
Yeah.
So besides, yeah, yes, I will give it a good, honest attempt.
Okay. Do you want to stay on as alternate, or is it just really not working for you?
Yeah, it doesn't really work for me.
Okay.
and if
Chairman
somebody else
Gill,
is
we
interested-
don't need to have an alternate.
No, no. Usually we have an alternate when people are both fighting to be on it, which is what happens with Nicole and me all the time. Yes, yes. And I can't do creeks. Wednesdays are kind of a no-go for me. So that leaves the golf committee. How's your golf game, Mr. Chang?
I haven't played golf for over a decade, shortly after I was born. But I'm happy to take on that role. I am just curious, what does bi-monthly mean in this context? Every 2 months or twice a month? Every 2 months, okay.
Okay. And is everybody else happy with what they are doing?
Yes.
Okay, good. Yeah. I am. I'm actually the most active one is probably De La Guerra Plaza right now, plus Park, but, and Nicole, I'm right now down as Park Foundation. Just, do you want to keep it that way, or do you want to both go on?
Whatever you want.
Okay, well, why don't we do that, take a quick conversation about that, and we'll just make a call. Okay. Commissioner Aldana.
Yes, on the street tree at Monday, the first Thursday, 8:30, is that when they take their tour around town?
I'm actually really quite happy being the liaison
No,
stuff.
no.
Just
I
try
have-
and take that
I
away
just
from
have-
her.
I just have a question regarding that. Can, on occasion, can we join in?
I think it's public.
Yeah.
Yeah, if you just go in,
Yeah.
in the agenda, I think it's a public meeting like any other.
Correct.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
But don't try to take it away from her. Okay. I think we're good. All right. With that, I believe that is all we've got for today, so I will adjourn the meeting. Thank you very much.